I was recently coaching one of my family members that just hit the six-figure mark in their job, and they were talking about how they were so excited to get this job, but after about 6 months, they still felt like they were broke, even though they made like $30,000 more than what they were making before. And I was asking them about, what are their expenses and things like that. And this really confused me. However, it supported the statistic that says over 56% of all Americans that make $100,000 or more are still living paycheck to paycheck. And it really caused me to understand, why is this the case? So for this reason, I want to share with you in this video 3 reasons why high income earners still feel like they're broke and how you can feel like you're rich at any income level. Reason number 1, income versus outcome living expenses. A large part of feeling like you're rich is understanding and even feeling like your money goes a lot farther than it could be if you live somewhere else. And so when people, let's say somebody makes $100,000. If somebody makes $100,000, but their living expenses is $90,000, they're going to feel a lot less richer than somebody who makes $100,000, but their expenses are only $40,000. The second person actually has about 4 times more the amount left over than the first person does. And so that second person is going to feel a lot less richer, even though they make the same amount of money. However, there are some times where outside forces and circumstances just lend itself to it, such as where somebody lives. So people that, let's say they live in or work in California or in New York or somewhere, or London or something, like one of these like higher place areas where the cost of living is just a lot more expensive. Even though they make a lot more money, the amount of money that they're making, more than what they might have been making before, is all eaten up in the living expenses. Versus, let's say somebody who makes the same amount, but they live in Minnesota or somewhere, or some parts of Ohio where the cost of living is a lot less expensive. They're going to feel like they have a lot more money, again, depending on how they spend their money, but just the cost of living alone is going to be a lot less expensive. And so a lot of times you see, like Silicon Valley and San Francisco and New York, depending on what you're into, whether you're in fashion or tech, like living in these areas, the cost of living is just a lot more expensive. And so even though people that are making a lot more money, when they look at how much they're spending just to live, they're not making out any more than somebody who lives somewhere else, but they're making a significantly less amount of money. And so a large part of people that are making a lot of money, but they're still feeling like they're poor, is just because of their living expenses. And when you take into consideration that living somewhere else where rent might be $5,000 a month versus somewhere else where it might only be $1,500, that's going to be a significant difference in terms of like how much somebody can actually save to do something else with. And even people live in certain areas where they have the same kind of car, but their car insurance is significantly more than somebody else's just based on where they live. So a large part of people that make a lot of money feel like they're still poor, if you will, or they're just struggling living paycheck to paycheck, is because of the living expenses that often come with where they live. Now, I know there are some people where it doesn't matter where they live. They're going to outspend how much they make regardless. This is not, referencing to those kind of people, because like that's them creating an issue all by themselves. But other people that are really trying to get ahead, but they just don't see what's happening because they live in areas and they're taking jobs in areas where the cost of living is just a lot more expensive. That's the part of my heart that I have compassion for those kind of people. And I just want to make them more aware of what maybe they don't see, because sometimes it might cause you to do better by having a job that does not make as much, but the cost of living is significantly less and the stress is less and everything else is just less. Because I think it's very important to truly look at like, what is the bottom line? When you look at this job that might pay more money and you think about the cost of living, groceries, taxes, insurance, all of these different things that come with it, it's like, what's the bottom line? And if you're still coming out ahead a little bit, it's like, is it worth the potential stress that comes with moving to this other area than going somewhere else that might be less stressful or just no stress at all? Now, the second reason is visual separation from lower income earners. Here's what I mean by that. People that make a lot of money, especially if they work at a job, like they've gone to school, they might even have a master's degree, they invested a lot of time, they got these different degrees, they went in debt to get these degrees, they sacrificed a lot of their energy and effort and resources and all those kind of things. And a lot of people who went through all of those things, they don't want to feel like somebody who didn't go through any of what they experienced from an educational perspective and time perspective, and even a debt perspective, because they all of this money in debt. They don't want to feel like this person who didn't go through that has the exact same thing that they have. And so a large part of what they do, and I think sometimes this is unconscious, but it could be conscious as well, but I think they do things to visually separate themselves from people who did not go through their experience. And sometimes that might be the kind of car they buy. Sometimes it might be where they live, because these people over here should not, in theory, be able to afford to live over here. And so sometimes visual separation is what causes high earners to feel like they are broke because of how much money they're spending, just to feel like they're separate from other people who did not go through their experience. And again, sometimes people don't even really see and they don't pay attention to, and they can cause them to like almost resent people who often have the same thing they have, even though they feel like this person doesn't deserve it because they didn't go through the same path that this person went through. And education is one of those things that are the primary factor here when it comes to high earners, because a lot of times it's their education that got them these positions that they're in. And so for them to feel like, they've made it worth it, they've arrived, they've done something that's significant, they want to visually see that there is a difference, that they want to visually see that all of my hard work and effort paid off. And sometimes the big mistake that people make is comparing themselves to other people, comparing themselves from what this person has versus what they have. And sometimes that is a poor representation, even though that's what we do often in society. Now, the third reason why a lot of high income earners still feel like they're broke is two reasons. One of them is they don't have a success spending system in place. So what people do is sometimes they set aside a certain amount that they're going to save out of their paycheck. And I think that could be good as a start. But sometimes when people get a significant raise, they don't raise the amount of money that they save. They just keep the number the same because they're like, hey, I started off saving $200 a month, so I'm going to continue that. Versus if you save a percentage versus an amount, then even as your income increases, your savings is also going to increase because it's not based on a specific amount. It's based on the percentage of how much you make. And I would encourage people to save based on your gross, not your net. So that means that your savings is going to come out first, not what it comes out last. And when you put a success system in place in terms of spending, it causes you to just be a lot more conscious and aware of how you spend your money, because a lot of people don't realize that if you don't tell your money where to go, if you don't allocate every single dollar where you want it to go, your money is going to leave without your permission and without your consent. And that happens so often because people get their paycheck and then they wonder what happened. Well, what happened was they did not determine and they were not intentional of how they wanted their money to be spent and where they wanted it to go. But this is a large part of why people make so much money, but they still feel like they're broke, is because they do not have a success system in place when it comes to spending. And a large part of having a success spending system in place is also figuring out ways where you can save on taxes. Now, you might understand that as a business owner or entrepreneur, you're going to get a lot more tax breaks than if you have just a regular, job, if you will. But even people that have jobs, there are ways where they can even save money on their taxes that a lot of people who don't look for ways to save on their taxes, like they just don't benefit from. And because people are making a significant amount more money, there is a significant amount more taxes that are taken out. So there are times where people almost feel like they're making the exact same amount of money just because of how much taxes are taken out, even though they got a big raise. And so when people don't feel like the need to understand how they can save on taxes or how they can just minimize their taxes, then they still feel like they have the same amount that they started with before they got this raise because of how much money is taken away from them and how much they're left with at the end of the day. So when it comes to having a success system in place when it comes to spending, you really want to determine how can you lower your taxes. And you also want to determine like saving a certain percentage versus a certain amount. That will put you light years ahead of so many people that are making even more money than you, but they feel like they have less than you because they don't have these things in place. Ultimately, feeling rich is not about making a whole lot of money. It's about being wise with the money you have and then using that money to leverage it into something else that's going to make you more money, or is going to cause your money to go a lot further than it would be if you don't have these things in place. But when you put yourself in a position where you have a success spending system in place and you understand taxes and you understand like expenses, versus income, and you're intentional about like not going over a certain percentage, it just puts you in a much better overall position. And I'll tell you this, one thing that I highly recommend, and I know it's very difficult for a lot of people, is whether it's your mortgage or your rent, whatever your income is, not going over 25% of your income in your living expenses, if you would. And I'm saying living expenses just from the perspective of either your rent or your mortgage. Because when you put yourself like on that type of boundary, if you will, it just puts you in a better position where you're not living in a house but you can't do anything, or you live in an apartment but you can't do anything, because you don't want to resent where you live and just feel like, man, did I make this big mistake? Versus if you live somewhere but you still have a good amount of money left over, it gives you the ability to do other things that does not cause you to force yourself into only doing these things which you can afford. Because you never want to be in a position where you're doing something only because you can afford it, not because you really want to do it. Now, if you really like this video, or if you got something out of it, I highly encourage you to comment below and let me know what was your biggest takeaway. And if this is your first time here, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.